Polish online spin doctors are setting up the new Gaza rage machine, targeting English-speaking audience. Back home in Poland, their friends have been setting up self-proclaimed border control units. Let's have a look at both of these stories together with authors who brought us excellent reporting, Staś Kaleta and Ivan Laszlo Nagy.
Welcome to the Visegrad Insight podcast.
We bring you global experts on the future of democracy, security, and economy.
The leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Hosted by editors of Visegrad Insight.
Powered by Respublika Foundation from Warsaw, Poland.
In this episode, we have two special guests who just published at Visegrad Insight on questions that possibly might be, at first sight, not so related, but we see a connection, and I think you'll see and hear the connection by the end of the podcast. We're going to talk about how Polish far-right, very popular spin-generating online production, it has traveled across the Atlantic to produce more of the same, but under a different brand. And we are uncovering part of that story with one of our guests. And in the second part of the conversation, we're also looking to what that kind of spin generated across the Atlantic in on the let's call it media superstructure level mean for the locality, for people and folks on the ground whose situation is oftentimes reflected by the content of these portals, but also by political activists that visit them in one of the Polish-German border towns. My name is Wojciech Przybylski.
I'm Staś Kaleta.
And I'm Ivan Nagy.
So in this fantastic trio, we are recording this podcast. It's being recorded on Sunday, 5th of October. This is right after elections in Czech Republic. Andrej Babiš has won. He has won a bit more than expected. This 36% of support translates to over 80 mandates, 80 seats in a 200 seat parliament of Czech Republic. Babiš has vouched to run a minority cabinet. He's going to look for support from fringe parties, in particular motorists, the Eurosceptic group, and a far or maybe even extreme group of Czech Japanese nationalist who chooses to be the Czech nationalist, Mr. Okamura from SPD, and he's going to try to lead the government not of austerity but of full of promises, reversing the economic policies and social policies of his predecessors. We're going to see how long he can last, but my easy prediction is that he's going to play this tone even to his minority government, and simply because he will be able to afford it. If the policies that end the austerity measures will be stopped by the other parties in the parliament, he will clearly blame them and possibly try to build further popularity of ANO for what seems a very likely scenario, early elections before the end of the new term. But we are talking today about something that allows Mr. Babiš and many other populists to spin their narrative. We're talking about a specific project that has been, you would say, it was developed in Poland, but as we wrote in January 2023, it had a certain pattern and the link to the Hungarian political narratives, political propaganda done via internet means, by social media. And it has become extremely successful, so successful that people started to confuse the project with us, we who are so successful, of course, in the field of journalism and analysis. The project I'm mentioning is the infamous Visegrad 24, and Ivan Nagy has written a piece for us. We conducted an investigation in about it after news broke out and we knew who's behind it. Several Polish outlets have investigated that in 2022. In January 2023, in an article titled Polish Misinformation Using Hungarian Recipe, Ivan has described the parallels and the connections between the Polish operations and what Hungarians have been training in their Hungarian language space and internet for quite some time. But now we have some news story. The news breaking stories that, at least for our readers apparently, is that the Visegrad 24 group, with a bunch of other people from business sector or startup environment, investors in the digital companies, have been investing their time and money into what we call a new Gaza rage machine. This article, published last Friday, has been co-produced with the Columbia Journalism Review. And I wanted to ask you, Ivan, really about the origins of the project, what the Middle East 24 is. You may remind us what Visegrad 24 is in this context as well, of course, and why that story really matters.
Right. Thank you so much for the introduction, which again, it's so good to be on air with you guys. And hello to all the listeners out there. Visegrad 24 is something that we've been keeping an eye on for a good few years. I think many of us, and definitely many of our listeners, are very well aware of the fact that they've been growing into somewhat of a global spectacle over the past couple of years. When we first started delving into their story, they were at a few 100,000 followers, and obviously they gained a kind of notoriety because of the war in Ukraine, because of the fact that global media needed voices from the ground, needed people who were in the region. And Visegrad 24 has done an immense job at appearing as this local, regional news aggregator, as they usually refer to themselves, right? At the time, what Visegrad 24 was nothing but a Twitter page, just kind of resharing, repackaging materials. And, having Visegrad in name, it's a good stamp of approval of anything, speaking in this podcast. But it clearly positioned itself as something that was like quintessentially Central European. And a lot of the things that they reposted, most of the things they reposted were actual reporting. It's just like the little bits that were kind of ideological, right-leaning, and you could see that there were some connections to certain political narratives that were proliferating in Poland at the time, especially when the PIS government was still in place. And then obviously questions arose about their funding, about what actually is this whole project. And there were some ties, no definite ties, but there were some ties that would link them to right-wing groups and to some government funding. Nothing was like as clear-cut and black and white as that government is putting money into this project, but you could clearly trace the steps and follow the money and have like a really good hunch about what's going on, right? Obviously, politics have changed and to some extent changed back in Poland ever since. But what has changed primarily for Visegrad 24 is their focus has expanded. So obviously, as the war in Ukraine elongated, Visegrad 24 still kept posting and still kept this 24/7 online presence. They did launch their website as well, which they've been planning to do for years and years. But what really catapulted them to global fame was October 7 and the war in Gaza. Because they took this quintessentially conservative right-wing narrative. Once again, to the listeners of this podcast, we really don't need to delve into what that entails. It's a classic right-wing narrative that is very strong in Central Europe, that is about a pro-Western approach without being progressive, that is about a pro-Christian and pro-religious approach, which comes together with a very strong anti-Muslim narrative and building on as they usually call the Judeo-Christian foundations of our society, right?
Christianity without tolerance.
Pardon?
Christianity without tolerance.
That's one way of putting it, and that would be very accurate. But the point is, they use this kind of news aggregator role again. But when we were talking about the war in Ukraine, being like one-sided in the coverage kind of made sense and gained sympathy for them in the sense that, the Western world knows well that Ukraine is, the country that is being invaded. And like the narratives about Ukraine's role in this conflict are very much Kremlin originated. So at the time, people could turn to Visegrad 24 and say like, okay, yeah, well, they're on the side of Ukraine, as is with anyone with half a brain in Europe, right? Like that makes sense. But when it came to Gaza, obviously it's a much more contentious topic. It's very touchy, and obviously after October 7, Israel's response to that is really every day brings up new ethical issues, which are not as simple as black and white, right? So and with them portraying the entire conflict from a very pro-Israel perspective, that really helped them generate a lot of attention and hype in the Twitter sphere, which in the meantime has been taken over by Elon Musk, which in the meantime has become much more inflammatory, which in the meantime has started generating much more reach for outlets which produce divisive content, inflammatory content, things that really, well, this is why we called it Rage Machine in the title, right? Because the point is, they don't need to necessarily make a point that this is right or this is wrong. But if they paint a very one-sided narrative, they never report on what the IDF does. There's barely anything about that. By just providing a one-sided coverage, that alone is enough to generate a lot of reach and a lot of comments, a lot of reactions. And that has taken them from being a page of a few hundred thousand followers into now a page of 1.4 million followers. And they labeled themselves as the largest anti-Hamas account on Twitter. And indeed, their reach and their numbers had been astounding. We're talking about billions of impressions per year, which is something that in a couple of years' time to be achieved is very impressive. But obviously the way there was really kind of helped by the Twitter algorithm changing, by Twitter changing into X in general, and the way they use the conflict in the Middle East to their advantage.
Hi, if you're enjoying this episode, why not subscribe to Visegrad Insight? This gives you access to all our latest content online, as well as to our live and online events. You can use our special promo code for Visegrad Insight podcast listeners to get 35% off. Just go to visegradinsight.eu, choose a yearly subscription, and apply code Visegrad35. And now, back to the podcast.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you exactly about a follow-up question about the broader implications. You said it's a pro-Israeli stance. I would be more specific. I think it's pro-Netanyahu position, specifically Likud and the far right or the far right Orthodox political positions in Israel that would see this rage very beneficial, especially when it's targeting English language speaking audience. And the very fact that the Middle East 24 is now not operated and set up from the country like Poland, where the operators originate from or have the strongest link, and they've been operating at least the Visegrad 24, but it's set up in the United States in parts of its operation, tells a lot about the ambition, again, the potential influence. How would you characterize it? How, where's the relevance of our reporting? Let's tell it to our listeners and those who haven't even read your piece. Just why it matters.
Yeah, so what we're talking about here, and thank you for bringing up Middle East 24. So I was looking into Visegrad 24 for a while, and then I saw that they're launching this new project called Middle East 24, based on the fact that they were so successful at covering Middle Eastern issues, and by successful I mean generating a lot of reach. They decided to start this new project. And the problem with Visegrad 24 was, from a reporter's perspective, it's super hard to figure out what they're doing, who are they, what actually is the team that's working around this, right? And with Middle East 24, it was a much more open process. They set up their page in May this year, and they set up their website in September this year. There wasn't like a 3-4 year delay in between the two. And they're very overt in naming the people who are actually taking part in this project, right? And luckily, I've been able to talk to one of them. I've been trying to reach out to everyone behind Visegrad 24 and Middle East 24. There's a couple of names here. There's this guy called Stefan Thompson who's been around at Visegrad 24 since the beginning. I've not been able to talk to him. Unfortunately, I really wanted to. But I talked to someone at Middle East 24, and he kind of explained it to me that it's kind of a spin-off project from Visegrad 24. They operate with a lot of the same group of people. They have a bunch of copywriters and social media producers all around the world who kind of come and go, who produce this 24/7 content flow on Twitter. And whereas at Middle East 24, they're very overt about having an agenda, right? Visegrad 24 still positions itself as like a news aggregator, even though it admits to its conservative roots, but it tries to appear to be something where you get your news from, right? Middle East 24 is very overtly about context. It's about combating a narrative which is critical towards Israel and trying to make up for it in reporting and in analysis. Whether or not that, stands the challenge of journalistic ethics or what you think about it, I think that's not for us to decide. But what is very clear is that is a much more open kind of approach to taking a stance in the debate in the Middle East. And the interesting bit is where America comes in, and one of the kind of hat scratchers in this whole story is when we go back again to funding, right? So both of the outlets, both Visegrad 24 and Middle East 24, they claim to be fully crowdfunded, and they are operated by a nonprofit in the United States called the Inter-Marium Foundation. And that's where it gets tricky, right? Because you look into the core documents, you look into their filings, and what you see is there's not only Stefan Thompson, but there's this guy, Dominik Andrzejczuk. I totally butchered the name. I'm sorry about it.
No, you did good. I think he will be very grateful for pronouncing his name correct.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I would have been grateful to talk to him, but he unfortunately didn't come back to my emails. But the point is, he is this Polish-American venture capitalist who's also on the board, according to the most recent court filings, of the Inter-Marium Foundation alongside Thompson. Now, I don't want to bore anyone with reading NGO documents in the US. It's something that you have to learn, and it's a tedious process, and this is why you employ and pay journalists so that they do it for you. But according to their core documents, the Inter-Marium Foundation operates on less than $50,000 a year. Now, make of this what you wish, but the point is, if you operate on less than $50,000 of gross receipts in a year, you don't have to file a transparency form. You don't have to file this form called the 990, which is supposed to tell you where your money comes from, right? So if there's an NGO in the US, most of them need to file this, and then you can see how they're being funded, right? Apparently they don't reach this threshold. Now, do I have doubts about it, considering the high production of like the videos that they have, because they've built a great studio. It's really, they are blowing up on YouTube and TikTok. They do the kind of explainers and podcasts. And I mean, they brought on Mateusz Morawiecki for an interview. They brought on Tommy Robinson. If anyone has the misfortune of following British politics, will know them really well. So it looks like a high budget operation. It's a lot of content that is being produced 24/7. They launched a side project. They're being published in Spanish as well, if I'm not mistaken. So is it under $50,000? It's not for me to decide. All I know is that they haven't filed any of their documents since 2023. So we should see at some point if they, otherwise I think in 3 years you can lose your tax exempt status if you don't file your documents. One day they might file their forms and we will see more about their funding. But for the moment, all we know is that they're being crowdfunded and there's nothing definitive that would contradict it. So let's stay with that. They claim that they want to be crowdfunded because that guarantees their independence. We also know that Dominik Andrzejczuk, the man who's also on the board, is a venture capitalist. There was like great reporting from Visegrad, which I have to mention, that looked into his businesses. But for the moment, all we can say is that they're being crowdfunded, and this is how the whole project is being run currently from the United States, apparently.
Yeah. I think that provides us more or less a clear picture, at least the direction that the Middle East 24 is going. You can look it up online. It's I think it hasn't been shut down until today. I think they're booming in terms of their online presence intentionally, and they are what seems to be part of the international movement of nationalists. And they clearly build the agenda also on the fear-mongering against Muslim migrants who illegally cross the border. That seems to be one of the key themes that links the groups of nationalists being active online and being active internationally, and forms a common agenda. And we'll follow up on this story after I turn the attention now to Staś Kaleta reporting, because that link would give us a better picture on the ground, how this is linked not in the online sphere alone, but also how it is being exploited in areas where actual policy, political and policing action takes place. So listeners of Visegrad Insight, focusing on Central Eastern Europe, would know that Germany has reintroduced border controls, otherwise in a free border area of Schengen in the European Union, between a number of countries, including Poland, in March 2025, not for the first time announcing within the European Union procedure a temporary reintroduction of border controls. And those border controls, border police, were meant to curb the inflow of illegal migrants, migrants who would be crossing illegally into the Schengen zone. And Germany wanted to make sure that those numbers are stopped. So we could see that there was a drop from the numbers there were really in previous years, but they were never massive. This was a couple of hundred people per month. For instance, in January this year, it was about 500 people whom German police would stop and send back, who got into Germany by various ways. In May, already after introducing the border controls, there was 700. So it wasn't like massive result, massive spike in efficiency of policing the border. But what happened is that in July 2025, right around the presidential elections that eventually was won by the far-right candidate, Mr. Nawrocki, we had a stunt by nationalist group in Poland who wanted to defend the border and make sure that Polish civil society activists of the far-right background would stand on the bridge and check cars. But it was at the same time happening in a Polish-German twin town that our colleague Staś Kaleta has visited and provided us with this long-form report about both the movement to protect the borders, Ruch Ochrony Granic, and actual citizens, which I find is fascinating to hear what people who live on both sides of the border and who have been there for much longer than the nationalists who were just essentially migrating to this border town in order to do their stunt were trying to do. Because what the local population has been struggling through years, decades, and centuries is to live together despite the difficult political and wartime past. Staś, over to you. What did you learn?
Hello again. If you're enjoying this episode, make sure to give us a rating. It really helps boost our platform and invite more guests for you, our listeners.
Thank you, Wojciech, for that context, and thank you, Ivan, for your reporting also on Visegrad 24 and Middle East 24. Yeah, I think basically it's really important to highlight that all of these narratives that you hear about and this information space that you hear about has real world consequences. So, like you said, Wojciech, these Polish border controls were a result of this German decision to impose controls, but also a lot of this nationalist far right pressure on the ground. And in the information space, basically saying, our country is under attack from Germany sending all of these migrants back to Poland. We need to do something about this. And yet when I went there, a large, percentage of the people I spoke to in this twin city, which was Słubice on the Polish side and Frankfurt an der Oder on the German side, connected via a bridge which marks the border, they were very much against this. First of all, socially, right? Because these are people who live together. They have lived together for decades. But also economically, this is terrible for business. When I was going through shops, I spoke to everyone basically from market vendors to mayors. They all said, this is a terrible decision. This isn't how, countries are meant to work together in this age. And, I recall someone basically clearing a table that we were sitting at, drawing a map of Europe and saying, why is there this border here? But the point, to address your point, Wojciech, specifically about this border defense movement is what it's called, is that really this is kind of a cosplay of border guards, right? Because you have these people who, one of the people I met, for example, I described, was wearing this, they wear these high-vis jackets with their border defense movement emblem on it. But really, they're wearing an AC/DC t-shirt, they're wearing shorts, they're wearing Adidas sliders. These aren't people with real authority, right? And yet they're going on the bridge, they're catching someone who doesn't look like them and saying, you can't come into this country. And this is then stoking all of this pressure and all of this kind of sentiment that people who actually live there don't want. And then you have people like, for example, Robert Bąkiewicz, who is this prominent far-right politician. He'll go on social media, he'll record this. This will then become a massive thing online and say, look, we have a massive problem. Or a news channel like TV Republika will go and film one instance of something happening and say, look, our country is under attack. So the idea of my reporting was to show, actually, there isn't this big of a problem. Secondly, this border defense movement is basically a kind of cosplay movement. They don't have any authority. And thirdly, the people who live there don't want these things happening.
But tell us a little bit about the people actually you've been interviewing, apart from the border, the self-proclaimed border protectors. How much effort how much effort is in danger because of the groups of the nationalist activists?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things we talk about in the long read is this kind of European miracle, right? Where Polish-German relations have been really difficult, obviously, since the World Wars. But since basically the 90s, there's been a huge effort in this region to develop cooperation between these two sides. One of the people I spoke to, Dr. Krzysztof Wojciechowski, he was the long-time director of a university there, which was really forward-thinking and avant-garde because it was basically a Polish-German university. It was an international university. And one of the things he says is that, they spent years working on this collaboration so that, Polish people wouldn't think that German people hated them, and likewise the other way around, right? And suddenly this university was this result of people actually thinking, okay, we want to work with these people. And in turn, both sides grew economically because they were working together economically as well. Now that you have these border controls, that completely stops. You have, a blockage on the motorways around Słubice and Frankfurt-Oder, but also right in the middle. People don't want to cross the border to go to shops on the other side, for example, because they know it's going to take them hours longer. It's a really difficult situation for cooperation. And the difficult thing is that all of this is, part of the result of a very malicious information campaign. So another person I spoke to was Bartosz Wielinski. He's one of our fellows at Visegrad Insight. He basically said that this is all the result of campaigns run by the Law and Justice Party, by other right-wing parties who claim that Germany's, flooding Poland with migrants, the sort of thing that isn't true.
Well, it seems from what you're saying, Staś, at least I have a question to ask to both of you. With your extensive experience also in as Visegrad Insight Fellow and editor in case of Staś, looking at the region more broadly, how well do you think these projects are positioned for our domestic audiences at home in Central Europe, while we're talking about those projects picking up pace definitely in the English language space? So the target audience is somewhere else, and this purpose of doing that in English captivates my mind. I mean, I'm still asking myself why this is so hugely internationalized and specifically targeting the English language audience. In the case of the Offspin in the Middle East 24, in particular the American audience. So where's the Central Europe American or international connection, and whether your perception, your grasp of the region is that people in this region are so receptive to those messages, or that's rather superficial?
If I may, yeah. Oh God, I'm going to go down to the political science rabbit hole. Please stop me from doing that. The point I'm trying to make is that if we go back a little bit in time, and I think it will bring us up to speed in the current moment, you would see like a decade ago, maybe 6, 8 years ago, it was this region, Central Europe, in the Western world, where you've had the first kind of political taboos falling. Like you saw how Orban responded to the migration crisis. Same goes to Poland as well. But like the migration crisis, that you can actually speak in an inflammatory way and make that into the political mainstream, right? And if you look back in like the middle of the 2010s, or like the second half of the 2010s in the West, you saw those lines were not entirely crossed, right? Like Trump used some inflammatory language, but then, you know, his kind of apparatus would bring him back to normalcy. He would not follow through on all the crazy things he would say in a campaign, right? But this part of the world, Central Europe, was the part of the world where politicians in prominent positions said things that were unimaginable politically for decades and decades on, and then they followed through on that. And what has changed, I think, in the past 5 years, especially since COVID, was that the Western right-wing politicians and the Western populists kind of started adopting that kind of boldness and bravery that we see in Central and Eastern Europe. And, you know, Trump realized that, yeah, you can say whatever you want. And everyone in the Western world and in the Western part of the Western world realized that, oh, this is actually something we can do. We can actually speak up, not just, you know, talk about protecting our culture, but actually going against people, like actually tailoring our communications that targets groups, right? Which was unimaginable. And so I think there's this kind of back and forth that definitely what we had seen in Central and Eastern Europe for a while has inspired what is happening in the West now. But what is happening in the West now is like perfecting all of this. So it's no surprise that you have the Patriots of Europe having their slogan, "Make Europe Great Again." And you see all of the return of the populists. Look at Babiš. They're returning to power, not necessarily just on the far right or like right-wing messaging, but also in economic messaging. Guess who else did that? Trump did that. Trump got back to power because he figured it out how to mix and match the two. So all in all, what I want to say is that there's definitely an interconnectedness. And what we had seen for a long time, that far-right politicians from across the board couldn't really see eye to eye, because they would eventually find out that, well, if I'm a nationalist and they're a nationalist, we're not going to see eye to eye. I think that kind of new conservative movement that they themselves refer to as conservative, I would use different words. I think they're kind of coalescing much better now than they were 5 or 10 years ago. And what we're seeing in like the English language coverage of that is that these are kind of starting to get close to each other, and the kind of Venn diagrams and the overlaps in the Venn diagram are getting larger and larger and larger. And that definitely helps their movement. And that is a thing that leads to Visegrad 24, which, by the way, writes about this German-Polish border issue all the time. And I think that's kind of putting the narratives together. And that's also what makes them stronger, because now they have a basis. They didn't used to have a base, and now they do internationally. And I think that's something we definitely have to observe and keep an eye on the long run.
Yeah, Stash, over to you. I see you also want to have a comment on that. I just wanted to ask you a very specific question, also as a follow up to what you have to say. Who are those people? How would you describe those people? I mean, you mentioned they were wearing sneakers and AC/DC pullovers or T-shirts on them. So they were kind of, in a way, symbolically mixing a couple of messages. But you spent some time and you talked to them quite a bit. How much do you think they're part? They believe that they are part of this international movement of nationalists of the far right in transatlantic space.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting. I mean, I can't delve into political science, but the comment I was going to give to your initial question was it's interesting, because when you think about nationalist movement, you think, okay, we're going to separate ourselves, which Ivan mentioned. But I think the other aspect of this being a kind of international movement and it coalescing more is that it gives these people just enough of an international outlook to say, okay, this is the other that we're going against. So a lot of what I heard of in Subice was, when people were pro these border defense movements and pro these far right narratives, they would say, we've seen what happened here. Right? We've seen what happened in England. We've seen what happened in Spain, wherever they want to say. We don't want that to happen here. right? Even though the numbers, when you look into them, might not be so different, right? They might be, but they might not be so different. It gives you a kind of other to contrast yourself to. I think that is something that I really saw. In terms of what these people were like, I don't want to be too critical, because the Adidas sliders and the AC/DC t-shirt is a kind of a joke, right? But when you speak to them, I do really feel that they believe in this, especially the people who are there on the ground in the border defense movement. When Nawrocki came in, he thanked them for serving their civic duty. That was his kind of opinion. And I do really feel that that's what they feel they're doing, right? They really feel that. And when I spoke to Bąkiewicz and his assistant, and, we spoke in this gas station 100 meters from the border, they were perfectly, respectable. They spent an hour talking to me. I appreciate that very much. The issue is that, first of all, what they're saying isn't respectful to lots of other people. And secondly, I think higher up, there are people controlling this, like your Visegrad 24s, who I don't think believe in this, but they want to kind of spread this kind of narrative and make a certain kind of people, or the border defense kind of movement people, believe that and do this and spread this message. But yeah, Ivan, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, no, it's just a tiny personal experience which really relates to, and thank you so much for sharing it. It's a great read, and I'd really recommend all of our listeners read through the stories that we were talking about today. I think, and definitely the media and mainstream media, and even, organizations like us definitely have some fault at this, because it's very popular to still imagine right-wing voters or populist voters as like a mob, who are like people who are like genuinely come from like a place of malicious intent, that they want to crack down on people coming into a country in a violent manner, and they really want to get rid of people in the worst way imaginable. I think what has definitely changed in this sense in the past 5 years is that and exactly as Tash mentions it, those who gain political capital out of saying these messages, they might not believe in it. They do that because they know it's going to make them more popular and more visible. But it does play into the fears of normal citizens. And these citizens, if you go and talk to them at a petrol station, or this is my experience, I was here reporting in Pennsylvania for the elections last year in the US. I went out in Scranton. If there are any Office fans out there, you would know of this place. I was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I spoke to dozens of people. All of them were Trump supporters. And they were the genuine, nice people you would meet in a mid-sized American town. It's not the mob. There were young people, older people. It's very interesting to figure out how, and I guess it's a political exercise for everyone who wants to defeat these political groups, to figure out why their messaging resonates. Because the core messaging that they want their place to stay the same and stay safe and live in economic prosperity, it's a pretty good message. And even if they come from malicious intent, some politicians are very good at targeting that. So it's something we have to keep an eye on, that it's not a mob. It's really genuine people on the ground who are voters like all of us and live everyday lives like all of us do, who support these messaging. Just figure out where it's coming from. And it's a challenge for both journalists, especially for politicians.
I think that's a moment when we're going to hit a pause button and encourage our listeners to read The New Gaza Rage Machine by Ivan Laszlo-Nagy, the Gaza Rage Machine with Polish origins, and the story of Visegrad 24 and Middle East 24. That's on Visegrad Insight's main page. And along with it, you'll find the story produced by Staś Kaleta. It's a long read. This Polish-German border community still believes in the European miracle. Staś Kaleta and Ivan Laszlo-Nagy have been with us today. Thank you, guys. We'll definitely look into these cases further on. And thanks for bringing not just your insights from the work you've done, and that's excellent reporting that I'm sure it's going to be appreciated also now by those who haven't read it yet. But also your reflections, you stepped out of the comfort zone of a journalist, and you did try to think with me on the hypothetical political questions here. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Okay, so that's it for today.
Thank you, Wojciech.
Thank you, Wojciech. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys. And thank you for listening.
And that's all from this week's episode of the Visegrad Insight podcast, bringing you the leading voices from Central Europe and on Central Europe.
Make sure to subscribe, and we'll be in touch next week.